2 days before the 42nd death anniversary of Ninoy Aquino and the first death anniversary of former Ambassador Howard Dee, their grandson will talk about the legacy of democracy and love for the country that his grandparents devoted their lives to. Good morning. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno, and this is At the Forefront. In recent months, he has spoken against historical distortion, the redesign of national currency, and the importance of civic responsibility in today's political and social landscape. How does Kiko Aquino Dee envision the legacy left behind by his illustrious elder kin? With us this morning is the grandson of former Ambassador to the Holy See, Howard Dee, as well as Senator Ninoy Aquino and former President Cory Aquino's grandson, Francis Joseph Aquino-Dee. Good morning, Kiko.
Ay, good morning, Attorney Karen. Good morning po sa lahat ng mga nanonood po ngayon.
Well, your background is really, truly illustrious. Your grandparents, Ninoy Aquino and Ambassador Howard Dee, both died on the same day, August 21.
That's right.
That type of coincidence, how did you feel about in your family, like having the same death anniversaries?
Well, I think the immediate thing is I have to split myself in half on August 21.
Yeah, I was wondering, kasi magkaibang side pa, di ba?
Magkaibang side, and then yung Lolo Howard ko po is in Heritage, and then my Lolo Ninoy is in Manila Memorial Park po. So, and originally the regular commemoration for Lolo Ninoy would be 10 a.m. in the morning, and that's what we stuck to this year. And I figured baka si Lola Howard can be in the afternoon. Pero my cousins from Canada naman and the States also want to join via Zoom. So we had to move the one for Lola Howard at 11. So
naku, magkadikit. So you're gonna run from Heritage to...
The other way around, from
baliktad.
Manila Memorial Park to Heritage po. So I think that's the very immediate thing when you're in the thick of the in the thick of the commemorations. And then the deeper meaning, medyo, I don't know, I haven't really... Maybe I've been putting off grappling with it talaga.
Well, your lolo, former Senator Ninoy, died at the time that you were not born yet.
Right.
But how do you keep his memories alive? And how do you have that personal awareness as to what he was all about?
Well, I think I think the caricature of Lola Cory when she was president was that she'd always talk about Lolo Ninoy. No? And I think he was never far from the conversation then when we were growing up. But in a way, he was introduced to us the way I think he would have been introduced to a lot of other Filipinos. Na he was a hero. He was this bright light of the opposition before the dictatorship. He stuck it out against the dictatorship. He was jailed for 7 years, 7 months, and then after a 3-year exile, he came home, even knowing there was a threat against his life, and then ultimately his sacrifice gave a lot of people the strength to finally stand up to the dictatorship and 3 years later bring it down. No? So I remember him as a hero, and then may konting parang side kwento na mahilig siya sa mga discount ganun, like
discount in what sense?
Yeah, so ako parang I'm sure my lola would be so stressed kung buhay pa siya kasi may mga 8877 na ngayon sa Shopee, no. Pero there's a story na parang there was a sale on cat food, I think, for cat food in the States, and then bumili siya ng sobrang dami, aso yung pet nila, hindi naman cat.
Oh my gosh, so talaga mahilig siya sa discount.
Right. So ganun, bargain hunter din siya. Na medyo namana naman ng mom ko.
So buti pala hindi niya nga naabutan tong generation ngayon ng mga sales ng 88, 99. Kundi kung ano siguro, kung ano bibilihin niya.
Correct.
That's a fun fact that we never knew about your lolo. And your grandfather, Ambassador Howard Dee, was also a Ramon Magsaysay awardee. What was his greatest accomplishment, in your opinion?
I think if you ask different members of the family, it's a different answer. So he was ambassador to the Holy See during the time of my Lola Cory, and I think my dad says that he was really a big part in lobbying for the canonization of San Lorenzo Ruiz, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely having a Filipino saint is a big thing. He was a negotiator on the GRP panel against the CPP, NPA, NDF during the time of President Ramos. He was on the OPA-IPA So don't quiz me on the acronym. Office of the Presidential Advisor on Indigenous Peoples Affairs during the time of PGMA. And then after he left government, he was still very much devoted to the welfare of indigenous peoples in Assisi Development Foundation. So I think, and then we were discussing earlier, he was also one of the first people to engage in microfinance here in the Philippines, and that has come to really affect so many people's lives. So I guess ako, like, since I'm into political science, it's the peace process that I'm most interested in as far as his career. But like any walk of life, whether it's religious, business, you can find something in Lolo Howard's life na he really made his mark. No?
Grabe, too many to mention pala yung accomplishments niya. And for you, you also have an uncle, President Benigno Aquino III, who became the President of the Republic. How did he shape you as a person, or what type of values do you think he imparted?
Well, I think the first thing is just to be careful when speaking. No? So I remember around the time, he had already declared his candidacy at this point, and the Maguindanao massacre happened in 2009. I think this is ironically around the time of my Lola Howard's birthday also. But the Maguindanao massacre happened, and I remember we were getting like new reports about how many victims there were. And I think I had heard on the radio that suddenly the number of victims had climbed by some amount, no? And then I think we were asked to there was a mass where we had to speak at. I think there was a mass where we had to speak at, and I just mentioned that off the radio. And then I think my Tito Noy took me to the side a little bit and said, "Make sure that's correct." Eh? And then sure enough, when later on when the reports were coming out, it had gone back down to the original number. So I think that idea
he asked you to fact check something?
Yes, because I just had said it because I heard it on the radio. Maybe I even misheard. No?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just my fault, no. But just that practice na, be careful about what you hear, no matter where it comes from. And I think that's especially salient now. Na it's not just the radio or newspaper, TV where you hear things. It's all over the place. No? So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, you do come from a political dynasty. I mean, you've had two presidents in your immediate family. Do you feel that your surname, especially with accomplishments from both sides of the family, is a benefit or a burden?
Benefit by and large naman po. Syempre, so I was in college when Tito Noy was president in UP. And alam mo naman yung UP na wala naman silang kinatuan na presidente, no? So that was a little challenging, syempre. But by and large, no, like so much of my life is beyond just my I have a very comfortable life thanks to both sides of my family. But beyond that, so much of what I do now draws from their example. No? I never would have become interested in political science, which is what I teach now, if it weren't for my Lola Cory in particular. Although ironically, she really didn't want me to study that. But
ayaw niya. Bakit? What would she have rather you study?
Anything other than political science is the sense that I got. Because I remember she was asking me, may sakit na nga siya at this point, I imagine, no? But she's asking me, Kiko, what are you planning to take for college? Since she passed when I was first year college, no? So a little bit before that, she was asking what I was planning to take. And I said, Lola, maybe political science. And I distinctly remember her saying, why, of all things to study? Diba?
I would have thought she would be happy that you would take that.
Because I think I know, I think it was such a difficult experience for her as president. And it was really, I think it was something that ultimately she found peace that, okay, this was her role, but it was never something she wanted to do naman, diba? And much less did she want anyone in the family to do it also. In fact, with Tito Noy, it took a lot of convincing for her to be okay with him running for just Congress in Tarlac, diba?
Ayaw niya mag-politics dapat?
Yeah, I think
former President Pinoy.
Oo. So, I think si Tito Noy would have wanted to run as early as 1992, pero Lola said, hindi, parang, it's bad. I'm the incumbent president, you're gonna run for office. So, that's a dynasty. 95 naman, I might be getting the timeline wrong, but 95 naman, si Tito Noy was running in the 2nd District of Tarlac. And an Aquino was in the 3rd, or he would have run in the 2nd District. An Aquino, I think my Lolo Hermie was the representative of the 3rd District, and then Ako Juanco held the 1st District. So these families aren't related, right? But if Tito Noy suddenly has a 2nd District, then it'll look like a whole family is holding Tarlac, which was enough to dissuade Tito Noy at that point. But come 1998, I think Tito Noy was just so persistent about it, and really I think showed Lola na he he was really in it for all of the right reasons that in the end she supported him running in '98.
And considering your Lola stance on political dynasty, it sounds like former President Cory Aquino did not like having political dynasty in the family. What is your stand on political dynasty?
I'm also very much, I believe in the spirit of the Constitution that says that we shouldn't have dynasties. Parang, I remember someone yesterday nga was saying na parang royalty yung Aquino, and it's like, I don't think that's what the impression we want to give. Kasi yun naman yung, that's what we fought against, right? That there's one family that lords it over everyone else. And I think in the end, si Lola in her last sona, and I'm paraphrasing, but said something na, she believes in the infinite giftedness of the Filipino people, right? So, and that's not really reflected when you have families of the same surname, or people of the same surname, sort of holding office repeatedly in the country. So you're not unlocking that full potential.
Well, given that view of yours, would you ever consider entering politics while Bam Aquino is there?
So I wouldn't consider entering politics even if Tito Bam weren't there. But especially now that he's there, it's a very easy thing for me to say, no, I'm against political dynasties. But I think the more pressing thing is, so I've heard it from my Lola, how difficult it was. I've had a chance to study it on my own since I've been teaching political science for a while. And the takeaway there is, it's really such a difficult burden to have that responsibility for your community. And while I think I'd like to be active for causes that I care about, it's not really a burden that I think I see myself being able to take on.
Well, in recent years, there were conversations about changing the Constitution, revising the Constitution. Do you feel that it's about time to amend the Constitution? It has been several years since the 1987 Constitution of your Lola Cory.
Right. I actually do think there are things worth looking at again in the Constitution. So, so this is a very poli-sci answer, no? Pero I've come to become a believer in proportional representation, and I'd like to see sort of more of our Congress elected that way. But that being said, our party-list system is really isn't really functioning the way it was envisioned to function, right? So there's maybe a lot of reform has to happen there first before touching that provision in the Constitution. But yes, I think it's something that really should be amended. It's quite, I think, strange that it has gone this long without an amendment. But I think at the same time, we'd want the people amending it to have transparent motives on why they're doing so, right? I think, in fact, I first became, I think, a lot more active in sort of contemporary politics last year when there was an attempt to change the Constitution that really, I think, took all of us by surprise, right? There was this people's initiative that suddenly popped around in different parts of the country, and we didn't know what was really going on. No? They were just amending that provision on voting jointly or separately, if I'm not mistaken. And it was really something that, ostensibly it was just about economic provisions, which I think there's a genuine debate about whether those should be amended. But because of the track record of the people pushing it, I mean, Speaker Martin Romualdez, sorry to say it, but Speaker Martin Romualdez isn't exactly a paragon of virtue, diba? So when he was attached to the project, you kind of doubt the sincerity, especially since his administration didn't really run on amending the Constitution at all. So I think I'd want to have that space where we can have a good faith conversation about amending the Constitution, but I don't think that's possible in the present environment.
And by that, when you say that it wasn't headed by someone that's not a paragon of virtue, but do you think that we'd have to wait for another administration for any amendments to the Constitution to have credibility?
Well, I think the first is we'd want to have a president, or we'd want to have an administration that really runs on this premise of amending the Constitution. And despite all of the criticisms that I have of the Duterte administration, to be fair to him, right? He made it clear that he was interested in amending the Constitution, right? And so I think that the discussions on charter change during his administration were happening a bit more in good faith because he was really open about moving us towards federalism. And the result of that good faith discussion was people didn't end up supporting it, right? So I think just a similar exercise like that. If you, as our leaders seeking the presidency, want to change the Constitution, you need to make it clear to the people that that's what I'm running on. and seek the mandate for that electorally. You can't sneak it in through the back door like so many other presidents have done in the past.
Well, since you mentioned the era of 1987, yung People Power Revolution 1986, but every time there's a People Power Revolution or anniversary, EDSA anniversary, parang pakonti na ng pakonti yung mga tao. What is your reaction to that?
Well, on the one hand, I think it's understandable that, the further away you get from a historical event, the memory is less fresh. There are people who have never gone through it and therefore don't have an attachment to it. So I think it's understandable that fewer and fewer people come. But I think what's also striking is that we're approaching the 40th anniversary of EDSA next year, February 2026. And so that's 40 years after the revolution. I was born in 1991, so that was less than 40 years after the end of World War II. And World War II, as impactful as that was to the lives of so many people, has always felt like a distant thing to me. We're approaching that point with EDSA where we'll be 40 years removed. And yet, I don't know, maybe for me it's because I'm related to some people, but I talk to the people who do attend these commemorations, and for them it does feel so recent. That I remember, was it 2 years? No, this was last year when we organized an EDSA celebration. Someone just came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for doing this." Na naiiyak pa nga siya, di ba? And I take both the quantitative and the qualitative, right? So you had that experience, which is very real. Also the quantitative, which is, yes, tama naman, fewer people are celebrating. But you take both of that na, okay, if there are fewer people celebrating, but there's some people who are so moved by this, then it still means that I think there's something there that hopefully you can share with more people.
Are you planning anything big for the 40th anniversary of EDSA People Power?
We're planning that there will be something big. What that is right now, we're still racking our brain, for example, to be honest, about what exactly we can show to people. But I think, in contrast with the last couple of years, I think we actually have something to celebrate as far as EDSA is concerned this coming February. So we're hoping we can do something fun that people can sort of acknowledge. We've made progress, but also we're still so far away from the promise of EDSA. So how do we tell that story of parang malayo na pero malayo pa?
Well, sorry, before we leave the topic of EDSA, there were statements before when the current President Bongbong Marcos won in the 2022 elections that this shows that the people power failed, because you were talking about the promise of EDSA, but
Right.
there were some people who would say that, see, this is proof that people power failed, or the promise of people power failed back in the 80s. What is your reaction to that statement?
Well, I think there's some truth to it, no? I think, again, like our country maybe didn't progress as quickly as we would have wanted after EDSA. And you can attribute that to a lot of factors. During the time of my lola, there were coup attempts that always seemed to drag us back into the martial law doldrums of economy before we could really take off. And I'd like to think that yung Tito Noyco really did his best to put our country on the world stage. But again, that wasn't fast enough. And we're responsible for that. Those of us who believe in the project of EDSA. If people have lost faith, then I think it's up to us to really show them that there is still something worth fighting for in this story. That we as a people were able to win our own freedom ourselves, not because of the intervention of any other country. And we were able to do it in a peaceful way. We were able to do it in a way that kept our values intact, that we believe that, that human rights, that every Filipino life is important. So hopefully, I think especially now that it's not exactly the golden age in our country right now either, maybe we can go back to that time when we were most hopeful about the prospects of our country.
And the results of the 2025 midterm election make you more hopeful as to the trajectory of the Philippine politics?
I do think so, no? Because I believe that even though it's still an uphill climb, no? It's the democratic opposition that it's the only force that got stronger since 2022, right? You have Bongbong Marcos, you have the Marcos camp, which their approval rating, it's rebounding a little bit, but it has sunk a lot from the highs of like 60% electoral mandate. In the Duterte's case naman, you have impeachment still looming over the head of Sara Duterte because there's no trial, it's not able to be expunged completely. and you have President Duterte in the ICC right now, and that's not, while she's probably still the favorite going into 2028, it's a weaker position compared to where they were at the end of 2022, right? Who's the only one that got stronger? The Democratic opposition, our Akbayan was the best party list. We had the number 2 senator defied the surveys, and then we got both of the senators we endorsed. And so definitely there's a lot of hope coming off of that.
Were you
election, at least for that side.
surprised with the ranking of Bam Aquino?
Absolutely,
Senator?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because he
Coming from a
says this
relative,
himself, no? Like, so we had a
nagulat.
mass. We had a mass at the end of the campaign period, I think a day or two before the election. And I think he was saying that the pie in the sky surveys that were most optimistic about him said he might finish number 3.
Oh, but I've never seen a survey na nakalagay number 3
So
siya.
these are like, diba? The internal campaigns have their own survey operations, right? And again, this isn't the consensus view. This is the pie in the sky, most
kasi
optimistic
the ones that
count.
were available on the news, publicly,
Right.
parang minsan wala pa nga siya sa top 12.
Yeah, right. So I honestly, like, what little I know of poli sci, I was like predicting a 12-ish finish. I thought he'd ultimately still get in. But yun, our wildest dreams was number 3. So this was literally beyond our wildest dream, right?
That's true. Do you ever see your Tito Bam running for presidency in 2028?
I think he campaigned on really addressing the education crisis right now. No? So I think that's, and you see it. No? He really sought to have a leadership role in the Senate as far as education is concerned. And now that he has it, he's exposing all of these issues in our construction process for classrooms. No? Why is it that the private sector, the non-government sector can build classrooms for less than half the price as the government does, right? So I think his focus is really on delivering on that issue. No? And to the extent that I don't know how helpful like any ambitions to 2028 would be on as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, but you're close to your Tito Bam.
Yeah, quite close. Saw him. I see him maybe once a month, twice a month, something like that. He's the cousin of my mom, no? So it's a slightly more distant relation, but yeah, we live close to each other. So yeah.
And now let's get to know you more on a personal level. So we'll show you pictures relating to you, and then briefly give us a background of what the context is in relation to you. So first, let's start with this. This is a 500 peso bill with your Lola Cory and Lolo Ninoy Aquino. When this came out, when you were probably grade?
Actually, no. So this came out during my Tito Noy's time. No? So this was already after my Lola had passed away. So I was in first year college when the bills were changed. No? Because the original 500 peso bill was just Lolo Ninoy, if I recall. So that's the one I maybe have more childhood memories with.
Yeah.
But I guess the current context now is because they changed they made the bills animals now, no? So my mom makes fun of me because I'm kind of hoarding these 500 peso bills. Whenever someone drops I'm gonna pay 1,000 with 2 500s. Okay, can I change? So I have a 1,000 peso bill.
But can you imagine seeing your Lolo and Lola in a bill? At what age did you realize that you come from a famous family?
Well, right. So I think we were just talking that I have this story now. When I was in grade 2, I had a classmate call me up and just to ask Francis, because they called me Francis in grade school. Is it true that your Lolo is the one on the 500 peso bill, right? So I was like, oh, this is a strange phone call to have.
And that time, wala pang cellphone.
Right,
no?
right. So it was just landline, diba?
Landline
And then,
pa,
like when you're in grade school, you have like a class directory and everyone puts their phone number there. So it's interesting that someone went out of their way to look for my name and then just ask that question. So that was very strange. But
yeah. When you were saying kanina that some have commented that you're like a royal family in the Philippines, have you ever been compared to the Kennedys, like the Aquinos, and then they're like Kennedys of the Philippines?
I think that was more a thing when my mom, especially when they were in Boston, no? Since that's Massachusetts is where if I'm not mistaken, that's where the Kennedys are from.
Yes.
No? And I remember they would always host people in the Kennedy Center when they were there. No? So I think it was a bit more of a salient comparison for that generation. By the time I came around, parang JFK was medyo distant na from our from my contemporaries' awareness at least. So there's never really a direct comparison to us.
Well, since you've been hoarding these types of 500 peso bills, how did you feel when the administration, the current administration, started to change the design of these bills to turn them into animals?
Well, very negatively, for lack of a better term. No? I think I might have. So I remember specifically, like some people were asking if the family had a statement there, and I think the family didn't want to comment on. Essentially, it is a bill. No? It's not the. It might not have been the most pressing issue at the time because we're in the middle of impeachment was just getting started then, and there are so many other issues. But when the family says, "Okay, we don't want to issue a statement," the signal to me is, "Okay, I can speak my mind more than get the consensus view of the families." I really said, nah, like.
So what did you say? You said you came out with a statement.
Right.
Publicly.
If I remember right, there's something to the effect of, well, I mean, this administration really can't do better than just distort history when their backs are on the ropes or something. So it's a fairly harsh statement. But I think that comes off the tails of the tail of they had removed February 25 as a holiday. They played holiday economics on August 21 last year, and they still have a sinking suspicion they might do it again last minute for this Thursday. So it's really, while I think when people make the contrast between the Marcos Jr. administration and the Duterte administration, they say, oh, well, Marcos has opened up a bit more democratic space, which is fair. He has done that. But there's still, I think, an effort to really make people forget about what we were able to accomplish in 1986. And that's something I really cannot abide by.
So the change in the images in the 500 peso bills, do you think that was personal?
I know there was a cartoon. Was it? I don't know if it was. Excuse my language. Tarantadong Kalbo or one of these other like Facebook cartoonists that made that sort of that made that argument na nadamay lang yung 100 at yung 50 kasi yung 500 yung tina-target talaga. I don't know for a fact. I wasn't in the room where it happened when that decision was made. But what I see plainly is there's a Marcos administration who's trying to, not just in this instance, but in previous instances, sort of gloss over this very, very important part of our history. So whatever the motivation is, like the proof of the eating is in the pudding, right? If that's what's in front of you, then you react accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And let's go to the next picture. This is your mother.
Oh.
So Victoria Elisa Viel Aquino and your father Richard Dee.
Right.
So how would you describe the kind of family you had growing up with your parents, Viel and Richard Dee? Because they also had, very highly accomplished parents.
Right,
Oo.
right.
So ano yung pagpapalaki nila sa'yo? Was it a lot of pressure or?
I don't think pressure is the right word exactly, but there is this sort of, you're always, I think, aware that on both sides of the family, our grandparents are not just lolo, lola, right? In fact, I remember after Lola Cory had passed when I was in first year college, a friend just asked me, close ba kayo sa lola mo? And the honest answer is, while I was always, Lola was always very kind to me. Parang merong mataas yung pagtingin mo sa kanya, di ba? Since she was a former president, right? And everything. And so, and the sense that I got was you just always look at your grandparents that way. There's someone you revere. There's someone that they say jump, you say how high, di ba? Ganon. Parang there's some people you obey, people you respect. So when someone had asked me in college na close ba kayo ng lola niya, I said, well, sakto lang, parang bakit? Ganong ka-close ka ba sa lola mo? And then she said na, I'm very close to my lola. Parang she's like one of my best friends. Ganon na, you can also look at a grandparent that way din pala. So I think it's that, no? The way we were, at least I was raised to see Lola Cory and Lola Howard were yun. Parang these are people who've done so much for the country na if they ask you to do something, it's really the least you can do, di ba? But, so yun, I didn't have that close of I guess a friendship with them if that's fair, but it's not something I regret din naman kasi it's that that yung ganung paghanga sa kanila really affected, I think, the way I lived my life, and that there's no regret there din naman.
Do you have memories of being in Malacanang as a child with your
No,
mom?
actually, because I was born 1991, no? So that's the tail end of the Cory administration. She would have stepped down maybe less than 6 months, about 6 months after, or 7 months ish after I was born.
Right. But your mom is known to be very, very loving. Would you say that Anong value ang pinaka na-impart niya sa'yo?
I think it's being, authentic is the word that my generation would use. It's not really something that came out anymore. But I think growing up in the environment of politics, she's very conscious about, what's real and what's edifice, right? And I think it always made her uncomfortable na people would have to act, magpaplastikan kayo like at one point, and then your real feelings are different. And I think that sort of part of her that, while respectful, still finds a way for her true feelings to be felt, regardless of what's politically convenient at the time, right?
So she's very authentic, your mom.
I think in a way she's the most quiet also, diba? So she doesn't really go out of her way to show that to others, no. But I think what was imparted to me was you shouldn't be comfortable, at least with. I mean, sometimes you have to be less honest, shall we say, if you want to be respectful or make people feel comfortable, but you shouldn't be comfortable with that, no? You shouldn't be comfortable with doing something different from what you really think.
And your
or
sister,
feel.
you have just one sister,
Yes,
Gia.
po.
Would you say spoiled ba kayo?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Probably.
Yeah, honestly,
Because you both come from well-to-do backgrounds.
right.
I mean, from both sides of the family.
Yeah, I've never, if I'm being frank, I'm really blessed. I've never been in a situation na if I want something material, it's not something that I can't get.
Yeah.
No? So, that we were spoiled, but I think we were also very conscious na very few people get to have like a privilege like that. No? And especially in my sister, in my case. No? So I went to, actually more so for my sister. She went to Philippine Science for high school. So that was state educated. And while there's still, because it's an exclusive, Pisay is still exclusive, no? Parang there's still some
Like
socioeconomic imbalance
well-grounded.
there. But not as bad as like say a purely exclusive private school.
What about
So
you? Where did you go to?
So I was
grade school to
I
high
was
school?
in Xavier for elementary and high school. So that's the Chinese Jesuit school in San Juan, and then UP for college.
And then you also went to London School of Economics.
Yes po.
Bakit ka nag-decide bumalik? I mean, was there any temptation for you to live abroad and work there?
Honestly po, it's hindi kasi ako ambisyoso po. So parang what happened was I really wanted to teach political science, and so I really enjoyed the subject matter in undergrad. What happened was the statistics prof for Poli-Sci I got wind that she was moving to UP Manila full time. So an opening was going to be created. And then I figured, okay, if this isn't necessarily my favorite thing, but if it'll get me the job really quickly, then I can specialize a bit on the more sort of quantitative part of Poli-Sci and then offer myself to take that load
So you
off of
taught
the faculty
statistics
staff.
for a while?
I still do, actually.
Oh, wow.
I started teaching 2015. And there hasn't been a sem where I taught where I didn't teach that course, the statistics for the social sciences. So, at first it was just the easiest way to get my foot in the door. But I came to really like the subject matter as well.
Galing. So up to now, you're still a professor in
Lecturer, no? So
Lecturer,
I think, So parang professor is the
the
title for
full-time.
full-time.
Yeah, I know. I was the same, professorial lecturer
Right.
for the UP Law School.
Ayun,
so
yun.
there is that distinction.
Right.
And you're also the executive director now for the Ninoy and Cory Aquino Foundation. What does this foundation do?
So the mandate is really initially it was just to preserve the legacy of Lolo Ninoy. No? So it was set up, I think November of 1983 by my Lola after the assassination, right? And it was her main vehicle. No? So I remember during the tail end of the dictatorship, they were doing feeding programs for Negros during the famine. And then the foundation sort of lied low when Lola was president because, well, she was the chair, but she was president, so she couldn't really do both of those at the same time. But after her presidency, she sort of took over as the chair and president, I think, of the foundation. They did things involving farmers' cooperatives. They were also involved in microfinance, if I recall correctly. And then the last program that they did was they launched this leadership program for for young leaders that was emphasizing the sort of spiritual side of leadership, since faith was such a big part of Lola's life. And after she passed, it became the Ninoy and Cory Aquino Foundation, since we also wanted to memorialize her. And then after Tito Noy passed, no, definitely it's a no-brainer that, yeah, we also want to tell his story especially, right? So our big flagship project, I think, is the Aquino Center and Museum in Tarlac, where at first, again, it was largely a museum about Lolo Ninoy's life with a little bit of Cory sprinkled in because Lola didn't want to talk about herself that much. But we started renovating it, I think, at the end of 2022 or early 2023. And the idea was to tell all three stories like in one, not quite seamless since we're not perfect storytellers, but like one narrative that ties together all three of them.
So this museum is in Tarlac.
Yes po, yes
Pero
po.
do you think that's sufficient to revive the legacy of your grandparents, considering that, you know, a lot of younger generation are not as aware or not as emotionally attached to events in the 1986 era anymore?
And it's in Tarlac, you have to go all the way
Oo
out to
nga,
see it.
exactly,
No? But so I see it as like not quite a constitution, no? But it's our core document. No? Na the story, the way we want to tell it, is as it appears currently in the museum. Definitely, we'll make changes as time goes on. I don't want the next sort of big change to the exhibit to be another 20 years from now. So hopefully we're going to continue updating it.
Okay.
But the idea of the exhibit is our architect, si Dan Lichauco, who's the son of Maur Lichauco, who's the eldest sister of Ninoy, right? So, but our architect wanted to make the museum centered around choice, right? So each section begins with a choice that Ninoy, Cory, or Tito Noy had to make at that particular point in their life. And if you choose what they did, then the museum continues. If you don't choose what they did, then sometimes there's something creative that we put there just to get
Cute
you to think
naman.
about
Parang
what life
choose your
would
own
have been like.
adventure
Exactly,
book.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, have you experienced personal attacks against you, and how do you respond to that? But before you answer that question, we'll have to take a short break. At the Forefront, we'll be right back. Welcome back at the Forefront. Well, Kiko, have you experienced personal attacks against you, and how do you respond to that?
Well, honestly, so I mean, since I've been appearing a lot more lately, and especially after 2 weeks ago in the impeachment vote, no. I honestly, my friends tell me I think see more of it than I do because my social media is fairly well curated. I just have a Facebook account that is normally set to private, so you really have to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find it. No?
Okay.
And then I think my attitude is just if I'm very firm about not running for public office, and what the privilege that gives me is I don't really have to care that much about what people think about me, right? I just have to, if I say what I think and people disagree, then that's definitely within their right, no? And if I can come up with a witty response to their disagreement, then all the better for me, right? But since I don't really need to worry about making myself popular to get a whole bunch of votes, then I'm glad to have that freedom.
You have that freedom to
Right.
say what you think.
Right.
But for me, I also just saw you for the first time on TV. I'm sure baka nung bata ka, I've seen you pagka may mga official events si President Pinoy. But I saw you on TV just 2 weeks ago during and we have this on screen. Yeah, like thumbs down ka. And
Right.
I found out that you were the grandson
Yeah.
of President Cory Aquino and and then former Senator Ninoy Aquino. So, what was your experience here like after you were asked? I think you were held for a while. Tama ba?
Yeah, briefly.
Oo.
So I was part of a group, no, that we'd been working on impeachment since December, no. So I was part of the first group of citizen complainants
So
who
you
filed
did
against.
sign an impeachment complaint
Yes,
against Vice President
the one that was
Sara.
filed on December, I want to say 2, if I'm not mistaken. And really what pushed me to do it was, she came out with this, she had this press con where she threatened people I also don't particularly like. But when reflecting, is how can we have a vice president that can comfortably threaten other people, much less the president of the Philippines, but just other people, serve as vice president, right? This is really messed up, right? And I remember distinctly, since I'm into poli-sci, I listen to a lot of global politics podcasts. That was the moment when we were most noticed by the rest of the world. Even not even when President Duterte was arrested by the ICC. No, it was when she did that I think people really took notice. Now, wow, things are really messed up in the Philippines, right? So it was important to take that stand, and I think what we did in the Senate that day was really just the climax of sort of 7, 8 months, I guess 9 months at that point, since most of January, really just going to all of these offices, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court. We filed motions for reconsideration, motions to intervene in the decision. It's really just the climax of all of that sort of pent-up frustration. Why can't we get people to act on an issue that's this grave? Right?
Well, what was going through your mind? Bakit ka nag-thumbs down? Do you blame the Senate for voting that way, given the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, so I think we had an idea of how the vote would go, no? Since I think si Senator Estrada already said 20-4, right? It ended up being 19-4-1, so not too far. So we were thinking, okay, how can we still express something at that point? And are aware of the rules of the Senate, bawal mag-ingay, you couldn't clap, you couldn't laugh, you couldn't make loud comments. We just settled on some form of silent protest, and what's the easiest way to show that? It's a thumbs down gesture. No? So, yeah. And in terms of is it just the Senate? No, I definitely think that while there were some senators who really would have voted in favor of the vice president no matter what, right? I do think there were some people there who were really swayed by the Supreme Court decision, and so I think a lot of our anger is also directed at the Supreme Court for making a decision that didn't just dismiss the case against VP Sara, but as I understand it, radically alters the way impeachment is going to function in this country if it's not changed due to the motions for reconsideration. So I think all of that frustration, not only were we robbed of accountability in this instance, but the whole process that we seek accountability has changed. I think that played into what we did.
Did you get sanctioned because of this event?
As I understand, we were just, we were escorted out. We were held very briefly, but not for an unreasonable amount of time, and then we were let out, and that's the last I heard of it. So, if they're not gonna, if others aren't gonna make a big deal out of it, then neither will I.
Well, since there's still an MR pending in the Supreme Court, should this motion for reconsideration be denied, are you going to file again another citizens' impeachment complaint come February 2026?
So I think baka, Attorney, I should be asking your advice about that. Kasi, I think the process is going to be very different depending on, if the current decision stands, right? The process will be very different. And then second, if it's altered, then we need to study the revised decision. No? So I think definitely it is paramount that Vice President Duterte is held accountable for what she did, but the best way to do that, I think, remains to be seen depending on what the Supreme Court decides. So I don't want to commit to. I mean, for all we know, maybe I think our view is we should be allowed to file in December, not in February, because if our first complaint was functionally dismissed, then. And it was considered initiated when the Secretary General received it, then shouldn't we be allowed to file on December 2, not February 6? So down to that level, I mean, there's a lot of vagueness going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
but the 3-month difference, does that matter to you? Kung mafa-file nyo rin naman?
Well, for me, it's the urgency that's important. No? This might be a bad example, but it is how I think about it. When the January 6 riots happened in the US, even though the people who filed the impeachment complaint knew that it would be defeated in the Senate, right? And we know what happened after. President Trump was still re-elected, right? But even knowing that, okay, the numbers aren't there for it, we need to show people that we acknowledge the severity of what happened, right? And so they filed as soon as possible, they elevated it to the Senate as soon as possible, and it was defeated. But they're able to express that this is an urgent matter. This is something that we need to take seriously. And that, I think, is the urgency of filing. That's, I think, what we're trying to express, that regardless of what the political calculus is, this is a grave matter, this is urgent, and we want to show that there are people who take this kind of thing seriously.
But aren't you worried that this might also lead to the opposite effect of vindication, like if the case is just dismissed, or like your example with President Trump, if the impeachment did not prevail, then he comes out stronger publicly in terms of perception.
Again, I think that is a risk, right? To be fair, I think we're seeing that we've seen Vice President Duterte's polls improve between this impeachment and the ICC. But I think regardless of what the political consequence is, I think you need to say that certain things have to be, what's the term? Certain things have to be are not acceptable in our system, right?
Or called out, I suppose.
Yeah, you need to call that out.
But what would you say to perceptions where this is a political persecution? And like you said, meron din kayong history of rivalry with the Marcos family, and like you mentioned earlier, things really went downhill, and that was evident when Vice President Sara had that press con saying things are threatening the president. Hindi mo ba naisip na nagagamit din kayo as part of that political persecution if that were true?
Well, so the first thing is, again, I think that the impeachment is politically difficult but morally necessary, right? So definitely it was used to the advantage of the vice president to consolidate support for her candidates in 2025. On the other hand, I really don't like that. I have to sound like I am terribly bothered by Bongbong Marcos being threatened, because I'm not. But he is the president of the Philippines, and more importantly, he's a Filipino, right? And as much as I have very little regard for his family, if a person can threaten the life of another Filipino in public in a very dramatic way, then that has to be fought. And yun, I think it's unfortunate that the politics sort of lined up the way they did. That I'm on one side or the other. But I think I've taken positions that are opposed to the Marcos administration as well. Spoke out about charter change last year. Spoke out against the anomalies in the budget this 2025. So for me, especially since, again, I'm not that interested in actually putting myself out there for elections, then I can just speak my mind, and even if
you go by the
complex,
issue,
right? Go by the issue.
With your your Tito, Senator Bam Aquino, when he joined the majority bloc in the Senate, did that bother you? Were you expecting him to be in the minority bloc?
I think just in terms of personally the kind of politics I like to see, I definitely am more attracted to conviction politicians, right? So saying, no, this is my line in the sand. If this is unacceptable, then I will not be part of it. So I think the word purist is tossed around a lot. And yes, I resonate a lot with that label. I am somewhat of a purist. But again, I'm not the one putting myself out there. And I'm not the one with the responsibility to deliver on a mandate to really deal with the education crisis in this country, which I think everyone recognizes, except maybe certain important people. But most people recognize that we actually have this crisis.
So
right?
you think, for example, it's very important for your Tito Bam, Senator Bam Aquino, to be part of the majority bloc if it will allow him to be the head of the Education Committee?
Yeah, ultimately, I've never been a senator, so I'm not gonna tell him you don't need to do this, you need to do that, or anything. But again, so for me, if I were in his position, I don't think I'd be able to do that, because I'd want to be able to express as loudly as possible that I'm opposed to this current Marcos administration for various reasons, not the least of which is the historical distortion. But again, I'm not the one who has to deliver on building all of these classrooms and figuring out how to secure free college education. He was able to get onto the education committee. He had an important role in the higher education committee as well. So I definitely respect and can't criticize what he did.
Well, you have a lot of powerful women in your family as well. Of course, how can you beat your Lola Cory, diba? But even your Tita Chris Aquino is also a super famous figure in the Philippines. How is she doing now?
So she's back and forth, no? So I'll be honest. When you say autoimmune disease, what registers in my brain is that's bad, and a lot of the details go in one ear and out the other because it's a difficult thing, no. As I understand it, she's getting good treatment naman, but because of the nature of her disease, there's a lot of back and forth. Na a certain medication might be working until a certain point, then suddenly an allergy pops up, where it stops working, so they have to recalibrate. So I think she's stable. She's receiving the best care that she can, but it's a complicated thing.
Mm-mm. Do you get to visit her?
Not very often because, again, since it's an autoimmune disease, she's, as I understand it, she's immunocompromised. No? So I don't really visit her that often as a result.
If Chris didn't have any health issues, do you see her as possibly entering politics? Was that ever a conversation in your family?
Well, if it's a conversation in our family, it's like, how do we make sure it doesn't happen, right?
Ganun.
Because for any of us, because it is such a difficult thing for when Tito Noy was president, and even more so when Lola Cory was president, right? So I think, Tita Chris was involved here also. I think in the 1989 coup, my Lola, my mother, since she wasn't married at the time yet, and Tita Chris all had the last rites performed on them because they thought that was it, right? They were committed to not leaving Malacanang because they made a commitment that we would have a democratic transition in 1992, and they were going to do everything, even sacrifice their life to make that happen. But it was a time when their life was literally on the line, right? Tito Noy got shot during that presidency as well in 87, 2 years earlier. So it's really it's really hard to have a loved one in public office, and they have to face the criticism has only gotten worse since the time of Tito Noy, and there are physical threats as well. No? So, to be honest, I say all of these idealistic things about political dynasty laws, but ultimately my motivation for being behind it is if it prevents my family members from being in office, then I'm all for it. Even
talaga,
no
ayaw
matter
niyo na
what.
talaga.
Right?
But you know, you're the third generation in your family, and the history really goes a long way back, where you have Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Versus Ninoy Aquino, and then President Cory became president, and then you have your President Benigno Aquino si Pinoy also became president, and ang ka-generation niya naman is right now President Bongbong Marcos. So now at your generation, we have Sandro Marcos and you, parang same generation, but Sandro ended up going to Congress already. Wala na bang pag-asa magbago yung isip mo?
No, I think I'm perfectly happy to let him and Kitty Duterte fight it out.
Kitty Duterte. Okay, so finally, since we're going to celebrate Ninoy Aquino Day this coming Thursday, ikaw personally, since you said things have gotten bad in terms of our politics and what's going on in our country, do you still think the Filipino is worth dying for?
I think ultimately yes, because in the end, where did that statement come from for Lolo Ninoy? No? So I don't know. I never got to ask him, but knowing how patriotic he was, and I don't use that term lightly, no, but there was that real sense of patriotism that si Lolo Ninoy, people like Kapepe Joke, no, Bobby Tanyada had for the country, that it seems sort of, I don't know, cliche or old-fashioned now, but they genuinely loved the country. And for Lolo Ninoy in particular, I think that extended to loving the people, right? It's not, he didn't say the Philippines is worth dying for. It's the Filipino is worth dying for, right? So, mahal niya talaga yung kapwa niyang Pilipino eh. And I think while maybe I struggle to have that personal connection because of just all the things that have happened, I think we go back to what is the most important thing, right? And the most important thing for me is we need to have a society where life is important, like for its own sake, no? And that's, I think, what was really compromised from 2016 to 2022, and we haven't seen redress from that. We haven't seen actual steps towards, concrete steps towards changing people's mindsets about that, even in this current administration. So I think that's what we'd like to fight for. Na if Lolo Ninoy, he was someone who gave his life. The Filipino is worth dying for. But he did that because he felt every single Filipino life is important. And if I'm making the sacrifice to help the lives of my fellow Filipino, then that's a trade that's worth making.
And finally, what's your plan for Thursday? Apart from visiting the graves of your Lolo Ninoy and Lolo, Ambassador Howard?
Well, we have the 10 a.m. mass na Manila Memorial Park. This is an annual thing. It's open to the public for people who would want to join. But also, more broadly, we did this as part of a Justice for All campaign. So last Sunday was the day after Kian de los Santos' death anniversary. And we did a tribute for him and a lot of the other victims of EJK in the Dambana ng Paghilom in La Loma Cemetery. And then in September 21 is the anniversary of the declaration of martial law. And since last year, we've been doing a candlelighting ceremony in the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani here in Quezon City. And then September 23, if it pushes through, since there might be a change in schedule, but currently the confirmation of charges hearing against President Duterte is scheduled with the ICC is scheduled on September 23. So again, we'll be going back to La Loma Cemetery to have another mass for the victims of EJK, who I think are, true justice for that is a long ways away, even by the time the ICC trial ends. But at least they're inching a little bit closer to what they've been calling for since 2016.
So a lot of activities lined up. Thank you so much for your time, Kiko.
Thank you,
and
Din.
it was a pleasure getting to know you and your family's legacy.
Thank you then so much, Atty. Karen, and thank you po for everyone who joined us today.
Kiko Aquino Dee continues to champion the preservation of Philippine history and the enduring values of the Aquino Dee legacy, emphasizing truth, civic responsibility, and the spirit of nationalism. He inspires a deeper appreciation for love of country and love for the Filipino people. Join us again tomorrow for meaningful insights on today's issues and personalities. To stay at the forefront. This is Atty. Karen Jimeno. Thank you for spending your hour with us.